So today I'm going to do something that I've never done before. It's something that's I've kind of sort of been dreading in a way. I don't really want to do this video, but I feel really compelled by the Lord that I should. So I've just been working on this video for a couple days, and I have a couple of rules for this one. This is not my usual fare. I don't usually take things that the enemy puts out there and try to decode them. That's not what this channel is about. This is a Bible study channel, and I've been doing a Bible study basically on the book of Revelation for the last 2.5 years or so. So what I'm doing today is not a Bible study. I am going to be doing a decode on iPetGoat. So a lot of people have looked at that video. It's been around since about 2012. And this is the enemy's version of what we learn in Revelation. The fact is, I wouldn't really understand iPetGoat if I didn't understand the truth of God's word first. So what I've learned in the book of Revelation has given me the ability to be able to look at what the enemy is putting out there and to decode what it is. So for those of you who aren't familiar with iPetGoat, you know, there's a part of me that says don't bother. But for those of you who are and you're curious and you go to other sites, people trying to decode it, and there's a part of me that realizes that you win people by whatever way you can. So if there is something in this decoding of iPetGoat that helps someone else find their way to the Word of God, so be it. That's a positive as far as I'm concerned. So understanding the book of Revelation is paramount if you want to understand the wiles of the enemy. If you want to understand what Satan is doing, you have to understand the Word of God. The Word of God is true. What Satan gives you is a lie, and iPetGoat 2 is his version of what he thinks the end times are going to be like. Revelation and iPetGoat do have something in common, and that is they're telling a story using symbols and imagery. So iPetGoat 2 is just another series of visions that Satan has put out there, and it's in code. So if you can understand the symbols that Satan is using in iPetGoat 2, then you can sort of understand the story. So when you're looking at Revelation, you look at biblical symbols and imagery. When we look at iPetGoat 2, we're going to look at kind of satanic or worldly symbols and imagery. And a lot of them are going to be really plain. We're going to see a lot of black and white checkerboard squares. We're going to see some Masonic imagery, quite a bit of it actually. And we're also going to see imagery that goes back to the Tower of Babel. All right, to Nimrod, remember, who built the city of Babel and the tower, who was a mighty one against the Lord. And he was married to a woman named Semiramis. And mythology that rose up around this woman, Semiramis, Nimrod's wife, that forms a large part of the symbolism of iPetGoat 2. So both the harlot of Mystery Babylon and Semiramis are basically go back to the same entity at the time of the Tower of Babel. The main point of iPetGoat 2 is the appearance of the Antichrist. Actually, it's his rebirth, resurrection, as well as his dual nature. That is, he's a hybrid. And we learn about this in the book of Revelation, where he resurrects and he is not only the beast from the sea, that is the entity who rises from the dead, from the sea of death, but he is also the one who ascends from the bottomless pit, who kills the two witnesses. That's Apollyon. Apollyon is the king of the watchers, the king over the angels of the bottomless pit. He was someone who was placed in the pit because he was so corrupting during the days just prior to the flood of Noah. So he was one of the watchers, one of the fallen angels that Jude talks about, who left their first estate, who wanted to take on human form and then polluted themselves and also attempted to corrupt the human race. A lot of this imagery is going to go back to Apollyon, who is one of the characters that's going to be in this iPetGoat 2. He's a spiritual entity who is going to indwell the man, the Antichrist. Okay, the Antichrist is going to die. He's going to be killed on Passover, I believe, and then he's going to resurrect on first fruits. And when he resurrects, he will become the beast from the sea, the beast who rises from the dead, who then is indwelt by Apollyon, and then Satan, the dragon, who's different than Apollyon, will give his power and his authority to this man, the Antichrist. But anyway, there's some very interesting images in iPet Goat 2 that talk about that. That is probably the big takeaway from iPet Goat 2, is that he is a hybrid, okay? And he's going to rise from the dead. And that's basically what we already know from Revelation, okay? The other thing that is going to be introduced in this is the whole idea of the second coming of the Antichrist, that he was here once in a form, and I believe Apollyon may have been the spirit that indwelled Nimrod. I don't know, kind of treading on thin ice there, but that this spirit, Apollyon, the destroyer, was here earlier in our history, and he's going to reappear in the person of the Antichrist. Okay, the other thing we learn is that the plan of all of this has been in place for a very long time, that God has planned that he would send his son, born of the seed of the woman, okay, that was Mary, and that he is not a hybrid. He is 100% man and 100% God, but he is this dual nature in some ways. That's how you can look at it from a worldly vantage point. And the Antichrist is going to have a dual nature too, but he's going to be more of a hybrid. Okay, he's going to be a man, but indwelt by Apollyon. And this plan for these two seeds, the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman, to duke it out in the end times, that is a plan that has been moving forward. Not only God's plan, but the enemy has had a plan too. And anybody who says that there aren't conspiracies is ignorant or lying, because the greatest conspiracy that has ever existed is the one that Satan has, that he's been running a program on this earth to acquire this earth, and he's been doing it over the last 6,000 years. So without further ado, let's just go ahead and take a look at iPet Goat 2. I'm just going to go through this, describe some of the symbolism. When it's appropriate, I'm going to talk about Semiramis a little bit more as well. So in this first scene, it's a title scene, we see iPet Goat. The first thing we notice is that there is a doorknob, there's wire wrapped around it. We see this goat with a barcode on his head of 666, and this is Apollyon. He's in the pit, he's locked away, he's basically in chains, and he is not dead, he is alive, and he is going to come back. And this is basically the story of how he comes back. And a lot of people see the word goat as G-O-A-T, greatest of all time. And iPet Goat, or the pet goat, was something that the children were reading on the day that 9/11 happened. The children in the schoolroom where President Bush was. So this is all going to kind of play in together anyway. So the 2 of iPet Goat 2, this is his second coming. This is his second appearance. Goat also has the 666, and that identifies him with the beast. The next thing we see is these satanic fingers, the big S $sign, hands dripping with blood. And he is the puppeteer in this play. And everything we see following this is actually controlled. It's part of the play, it's part of the story, and that's going to include even politics. This is a controlled storyline. This is not by accident. This has all been intentional on his part. So then we see President Bush showing up. He's in the classroom. It's supposed to be a recreation of the classroom on the day that 9/11 happened. And we see Bush, he's got a dunce hat on. He's stupid, acting dumb, saying on the video, "Fool me once." And well, you know, that's sort of how Satan feels. Fool me once, but it's not going to happen again. Then this puppet, George Bush, he turns into Obama. All right, so we exchange the dunce hat for the mortar board. We exchange a white person for a black person. We exchange a Republican for a Democrat. And basically what you're seeing here is that it doesn't matter, that Satan is controlling both storylines. And I just want you to notice what's up above the blackboard there, and this is the evolution of man, and you see that the final evolution is basically a transhuman, okay, someone who transcends human. Okay, so that's basically the first vision, if you want to call it that, in iPet Goat 2. And the second one is now we draw our attention to this girl who's sitting on the middle of a checkerboard floor, protected by the magic circle, and she's got a rabbit behind her, which speaks of actually Isis or Ishtar, Estar, fertility goddess. And basically what we're looking at here is a virgin. And if you actually watch this part of the video, you'll see that she all of a sudden realizes that she's in pain. And what happens is she gives birth to this fruit. This is an apple, rolls across the floor, it splits in two. And then what we see are the two seeds in it that pop out, and they merge together to create another entity. And this entity is a hybrid, and it's the lotus. Okay, so the lotus is a symbolic flower that we're going to follow throughout this video. There's two symbols that represent both the human aspect and then the spiritual aspect of the Antichrist. The human part is the lotus, which speaks of resurrection, spiritual awakening, enlightenment, ascension, rebirth. That's all symbols of the lotus. And then the fire actually is symbolic of the spiritual component, which is Apollyon. What we have here is basically a virgin birth. This is the seed of the serpent who is going to be merging with the seed of the woman to create another entity. Instead of the Christ, it's going to be the Antichrist. Okay, and this, by the way, is sort of a depiction of Semiramis as a virgin mother. And she was depicted as a virgin mother. She got pregnant with her son because of a sunbeam which came out of the sun, which her dead husband was supposedly made into the sun, and then a sunbeam impregnated her and she gave birth to Tammuz. Any religion that has mother-child worship in it, which is like a worldwide phenomena since the beginning, goes back to this Semiramis virgin birth of her son Tammuz. So then we're going to go basically to the next vision. We see a couple of things happening. This is outside the schoolroom. We see that it's midnight, which is, you know, when the clock chimes midnight, then stuff happens, right? And we see Psalm 23 on the wall there as graffiti. And I think that the passage we're meant to think about here is, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. And this is kind of going to be the journey of this Antichrist from death to life again. And also you see what looks like a lightning bolt, but I think it's more like the yellow brick road that he's going to be following. Shortly after that, we see a flagpole. The flag is of the United States is torn off, and I believe that refers to the destruction of the United States, which is something that's going to be happening. We also see the Twin Towers here, and if you take a look at the one tower on the left, you'll see how it kind of looks like a woman. And I think what this is here partially is the destruction of two genders, men and women. It's a ritual, and I believe that what happened on 9/11 was actually a very large ritual. And we can know that from when we look at this next picture here, where we see this masked player acting out the ritual of destruction and death. Okay, this is an actor who's doing that. And we're going to see these little characters throughout this story. And basically, these are the individuals who are going to be enacting the ritual. The ritual is how these things get brought about from the vantage point of the people who are involved. Satanic agenda is brought forward through ritual, and that's one of the things that makes it so kind of nasty and awful. Another entity that we're going to see here is actually this boat that the Antichrist figure is going to be standing on, and on the The prow of the boat is Anubis, who is the god of the underworld and the transporter of dead souls. And usually he, transported them deeper into death. But in this case, he's going to actually be taking someone from death and transporting them into life, which is the reverse here. The next picture here we see, this is Osama bin Laden on a boat, and he has black wings. He also has the badge of the CIA, and this is also part of the ritual. But what happened after 9/11 was we went to war, and war is ritual. You always have bloodshed, and bloodshed and violence are some things that the enemy uses to derive more power to be able to do what he wants to do. So I'm just going to skip over some of the other events that happen. I want to go straight to this baby Antichrist. And what we're going to see here is this baby who appears actually in an egg. What we see here is actually this entity, this baby, is being watched over by the satanic all-seeing eye who watches him. That's Satan actually looking through the lens there. And the serpent's tail is attached to this baby egg thing. And there's also a robotic arm attached, which leads us to think that AI is going to be a part of this as well. This is the seed of the serpent. Okay, this is the Genesis 3:15 seed of the serpent that we're seeing here, the Antichrist. We also see a few of the letters of Ordo Ab Chao, which means order out of chaos, and this is the motto of 33rd degree Masons, so this is part of the Masonic stuff that we see. The first appearance of the Antichrist is in a boat with Anubis, and he's on the journey from death into life. And what we're going to see is the beginning of this whole fire imagery, and this is the spirit of Apollyon basically making its way into this man. So after we see this vision of the Antichrist, what we see next is this person lying on the ground. And this, by the way, is Humpty Dumpty. Okay, he's an egghead. You can see the yoke on his shirt. Humpty Dumpty took a great fall and he couldn't be put back together again. All the king's horses, all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. And that this is the world. This Eggman represents the world that cannot be put back together again. And you can see that in his head is the serpent, and basically he's had the lies of the serpent being put into him. He's also got a bunch of drugs and pharmaceuticals lying around him that are indication that there was an attempt to try to fix him, but it was not at all possible. And then we see how Satan, who is this nasty face in this screen, is the one who controls the world through the media as well. And notice that his right eye is out, similar to the Antichrist in Zechariah 11, where the false shepherd has his right eye put out. He's basically indoctrinating the world. Later, we see some words going through the eyeballs of this entity, and it says markets plunge and war. So once the world is so sick that it can't get back together again, and I believe that's the purpose of the COVID virus, is to make the world so sick it can't be put back together again, then the markets will plunge and then there's war. So we see these airplanes, which are basically formed by a Masonic square and compass. Wars, they're manufactured by these people. And what we have then is a Middle East war. There it looks like an attack on Islam or attack on the Middle East. And we see this Islamic dome being attacked. And what's coming up out of this dome after it's destroyed are birds. Birds represent spiritual entities, demonic entities usually, that are released. After this pit is opened and these entities come out, one of the things we notice is that one of these birds will be turned into a moth, which gets turned into fire, which is, by the way, actually adds to the spirit of Apollyon, the spirit of destruction that's inside of this Antichrist person. All right, so what we have next is this masked man again, this masked individual who's sad and mourning. So he's going to just continue with the ritual aspect of what's going on. Remember, Satan and his people need to do these rituals to gain power. All right, so here we have this Semiramis figure again. This is what looks to be a virgin mother, but actually this is Semiramis, who was said to have been born from the sea, who here she is sitting on a seashell, and she's holding on her lap her dead child. This is Tammuz, who was killed, and this is the Antichrist person who's dead. And you'll notice on the next picture that his right eye also is injured. Okay, this is the right eye of the worthless shepherd. And he has the scarab, the Egyptian scarab beetle crawling across him. And scarabs speak of resurrection and life. So this guy is going to come back to life again, even though he's dead on his mother Semiramis's lap. Semiramis, by the way, is the prototype, the origin of all mother-child gods and goddesses. Virtually any goddess can go back to Semiramis, whether it's Venus, Aphrodite, Diana, it doesn't matter. They can all find their way back to Semiramis. We're going to next look at basically the rape or destruction of Africa, and then we're going to see this lotus flowing down the river, and it's going to happen in conjunction with the destruction of a lot of things in civilization, including the destruction of socialism, communism, represented by this man who's about to drown in this green slime. He's got the hammer and sickle of communism. Then the next vision, it looks like it's taking place in a rib cage, and we have the yin and yang that are in shadows that are sort of being obliterated here. There's a whole series of tanks that are coming toward this gal carrying the white flag, and this kind of is reminiscent of Tiananmen Square, and somebody stood in front of a whole bunch of tanks in a peace march. And basically, there is no peace, and that's kind of what this guy right here is going to say, and that's what the skeleton hand is, and you can see the tiger there, and tiger and China kind of go together. And then we have the face of that girl, and on her cheek is a no nuke sign, and basically she's being told by this skeleton person that no, we are going to have bombing, there is going to be stuff, the rocket's red glare you can see in the back of the skeleton, and he's going to go on to direct and orchestrate a bunch of stuff. Okay, and this is kind of goes back to the whole puppeteer thing. He's an orchestrator, he's the conductor of the events that are going to be taking place. And this again, the bombs bursting in air, this is part of the war ritual. And once the war happens, we see the Antichrist person, and he is getting brighter and brighter all the time. And after that, this poor world again, who is getting an earful from Satan and the propaganda that's coming. Poor guy is really miserable, but the propaganda never ends. Okay, this next series of pictures is going to show traversing or transiting dimensions. And this is going to be the ship where Anubis is taking the souls of the dead departed, and usually he takes them from earth to heaven. In this case, he's taking them from the pit to back to earth. So there's going to be a transitioning of dimensions here, and you can see the boat coming through. Then you see the fire being blown out of this part of the Antichrist. This is the spiritual component, and this fire gets then breathed into this other part of him. It gets breathed onto this egg, and now this dead person and Apollyon are kind of connected here. Spirit of Apollyon is now infusing this dead Antichrist person. Okay, so right after that, we move to another little vision here, and this again is another ritual, and I believe this is another ritual that's meant to empower the Antichrist or further release that spirit of Apollyon. And what we see here is Hindu goddess Kali, and her name actually means time or fullness of time. And she is also part of the ritual here, and she, of according to the legends, she went on a killing spree, an actual like bloodthirsty killing spree, destruction. And I think that this is probably representing when the harlot will go on her killing spree for 10 days and kill believers. And it's that blood sacrifice that adds more energy to the ritual that is being performed here. And remember, we get our spiritual power from the Holy Spirit who lives inside of us. But fallen people have to derive their spiritual power from the rituals that they perform. The result of the ritual is the Antichrist is receiving more and more spiritual power from Apollyon. And actually, there are fish people who are actually self-sacrificing themselves. They're throwing themselves into his boat. That is, they're going to go on his side. So the next picture here is a picture of an old hag. And this is Semiramis as well. She is a prostitute in this. This is the scene where she becomes impregnated by a sunbeam. This is after her husband has been chopped into 14 different pieces. And what this does is it actually impregnates her, or she says she's impregnated with Tammuz. What you have is the little virgin that we saw in the first part of this, where she has the apple that she is the virgin mother to, and then she's the kind of the Black Madonna with baby Tammuz on her lap, and then she's this prostitute. One of the things that connects us with that little virgin in the beginning is this design that's on her skirt, which is kind of on the wallpaper that we saw in the beginning. So shortly after that happens, what we see is this DNA strand of the Antichrist, okay? This is where we have the mingling of the DNA between the two parts of the apple again, okay? Where we saw the little worm come out and create the lotus. This happens after that old hag there is impregnated. Immediately after that, we have another ritual. And after this ritual, we see all of these men, looks like businessmen, maybe they're bankers or who knows what. Doesn't look like they're feeling very good. They're all gray. And in the middle, all of a sudden, you see the resurrection or birth of this Antichrist figure. And immediately after, you have the destruction of this army of business people. When this entity rises, he then destroys the system that's been put up. And here we see the Antichrist rising. And then right after that, what we see is this boy gets up and he's rising too. And that is when the Antichrist rises from the dead, the world actually gets up. This is not the Christian world. This is the other world that's so broken it couldn't be put back together again. And then we see this Satan slithering down the mountain, and basically what he's doing is he's finished his work with the world, and now he's going down to meet his son who has just risen from the dead. And we see the skeleton come out. All of this being orchestrated. Everything is according to a plan. And then we see this Islamic version, the Mahdi, this Islamic version of the Antichrist, rising from the pit of the mosque. And he is this dead child that we'd originally seen. He is reborn. By the way, the moon is symbolic of Islam. And once he is reborn, he actually sort of becomes the dome on the Dome of the Rock. And we see the city here is pretty lit up. Okay, the final ritual is super important. It's really easy to overlook these rituals, but this is how these entities are going to derive their power. Okay, so this is a fire ritual, and it's all designed to bring spiritual empowerment to the Antichrist, to take that spirit of Apollyon and put it inside of him. So the first mask we see on this entity is kind of a frog mask, and a frog represents sort of two worlds. When he's a pollywog, he lives, or a tadpole, he lives in the water, and then he comes out of the water. So he's amphibian, and this frog sort of represents the two worlds of the Antichrist, and also him coming out of the sea, okay, rising from the dead. Then the next scene we see he's been transformed into a bear, and this is an animal, a vicious animal who lives on the earth. Shortly after that, in the same ritual, he's transferred into a bird, a crow, kind of a death bird, but it's an entity that can operate in the air. Okay, so we have this frog who is in the water, who comes to the land. We have a bear who's powerful and violent on the earth, and then goes from being a bear to having this kind of ascendancy. And then the final stage of that ritual is when we see this flash of light, and all of a sudden now there's no mask on this creature anymore. It's just the face of Satan. And then immediately after that, we're brought to this face of Satan, and we see the actual birth or resurrection of the now indwelt Antichrist. So the rituals have proved effective. We see the dual symbolism here as he's standing on this boat right after his birth, after his resurrection. We see the fire on his feet, and we see the lotus, which represents the physical rebirth or reincarnation. And when he finally takes a breath and opens his eyes, we see that the fire is inside of him. That spirit of the destroyer, Apollyon, is inside of him, where before he had a barbed wire crown that sort of represented the goat in the prison that he was in before. That has disappeared. That barbed wire crown is gone. He's now fully alive, and this is what is taking place at the sixth trumpet. This is the day of the abomination of desolation. And you'll notice that the church behind him begins to crumble. That's harlot religion being destroyed. And then when we look further, we can also see that not only was this church destroyed, but also we're going to watch the pyramids be destroyed as well. That is, every and any religious system, even very ancient ones, are going to be destroyed at the second coming of the Antichrist. That's basically the story here of I Pet Goat 2. It's sort of an anti-revelation of how the Antichrist is going to appear, how he's going to be sort of the fulfillment of the seed of the woman, the false seed of the woman, that he's actually the seed of the serpent, and how he's going to come back for his second coming, basically is what they want to say. And he's going to be a hybrid being. And this is all done with the symbolism of Semiramis and Tammuz. And there's Masonic symbolism, which I believe goes back to the first Masons who were the builders of the Tower of Babel. The first people to take mud, make bricks out of them, and build this tower. I'm going to read a little bit from Semiramis, Queen of Babylon. This is an article by Bryce Self, and I'm just going to read a few paragraphs about how Nimrod and Semiramis met. Tradition states she was a brothel keeper in the city of Erech, leading one to speculate on the nature of their initial acquaintance. Semiramis is a Hellenized form of the Sumerian name Samar Amat, or gift of the sea. And so you can see that picture of the black Madonna there coming out of the sea. So the initial element, Samar, when translated into Hebrew, becomes Shinar, the biblical name for Lower Mesopotamia, and Shinar was where the Tower of Babel was built. So she was one of the instigators in forming the false religion. What she did was she invented a religion that was based primarily on a corruption of primeval astronomy formulated by Noah's righteous ancestors before the flood. In the original, this system depicted by means of constellations the story of Satan's rebellion, the war in the heavens, his subversion of mankind, the fall of Adam and Eve, and the promise of one to come who would suffer and die to relieve man from the curse of sin, and then be installed as Lord of creation, and the final resubjugation of the cosmos to God through him. These eternal truths were corrupted by her, quite obviously by the evil one who was controlling her, into a mythic cycle where the great dragon is depicted as the rightful Lord of the universe, whose throne has been temporarily usurped by one whom we can recognize as the God of the Bible. And the serpent creates man in his present miserable state, but promises that a child would one day be born of a divine mother, which child would supplant God, become a god himself, and return rulership of the earth to the serpent. So these myths and fables were based upon the then widely known story of the constellations and were introduced under the guise of revealing the hidden esoteric knowledge concealed in them, regardless of the fact that the original intent was quite straightforward. Semiramis had a son named Damu, from the Sumerian word dame, or blood, which in the later Babylonian language became Damuzi, in Hebrew Tammuz, in Greek Adonis. And of course, Semiramis assumed the regency for her infant son and ruled as absolute monarch for more than 42 years. And so that's basically all I'm going to read on this article, but you can find that online. So really, that's the breakdown of I, Pet, Goat 2. It's not too hard to understand. It's when you understand what's going on in the book of Revelation, you can see how that story has been corrupted by the enemy and put in his form of a series of visions. And this is sort of his revelation to his people at the time of the end. So I'm not sure I'm going to leave comments open for this. I may. I don't really want to dwell on this whole I, Pet, Goat 2. I don't really want to talk about all the symbolism that's in it. I think it's really straightforward and plain. There isn't much to it except for what I've already shared with you. And our information really comes from the Bible, from the Word of God, and from what we can ascertain from the book of Revelation as far as things go toward the end. The reason I'm putting this out there, though, is so that you can see that the other side has a similar depiction of their anti-Messiah being a dual-natured individual who will rise from the dead and be indwelt by this entity from the pit, the greatest of all time. And there is a kind of a second coming for the Antichrist person. Take it for what it's worth. It may not be worth a whole lot to you, but I just thought I would put that out there, and I felt like the Lord was leading me in this direction, and so there it is. So we're awaiting our Messiah, the true one, who is going to be coming and taking us who believe in him out of the world. He's going to be allowing certain events to take place, the things that the enemy's people think they have to do in ritual form. God is actually going to allow some of these rituals to manifest, and particularly things that may be happening over Halloween this year, as well as things that will be happening over the spring equinox next year and on some of these satanic holy days. Finally, all their rituals will come to fruition, and this blood sacrifice that's going to be happening of innocent believers next spring will be the ultimate blood sacrifice that will bring in, or usher in their minds, will usher in the resurrection of the Antichrist. So there you have it. So we'll see you on another video. Till then, I pray you'll have a very, very blessed day.